What is going on, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back to review the first episode of the new miniseries Irma Vep on HBO, and I know I'm about 5 days late on this review, but I was out of town this past week. But this show really jumped out at me, and I wanted to sing its praises, even if I am a little bit tardy. And what's the best way to pitch this? Irma Vep is a miniseries written and directed entirely by Olivier Assayas, which is a remake of his 1996 movie, Irma Vep. And that movie is about a remake being made of the 1915 and 1916 movie serial Les Vampires by Louis Fouillade. I doubt I'm pronouncing that correctly, but essentially we have a making of remake of a movie about a making of a silent film classic from France, and it stars Alicia Vikander, who's absolutely in fine form. And I absolutely love the first episode. I'm a sucker for shows and movies about filmmaking, but not all of them. I mean, when they suck, like anything, they suck. But when they really get it right, oh my God, they're just a joy to watch. And Olivier Assayas has been putting together an astonishing filmography for decades at this point. More recently, he's had movies like Personal Shopper and Clouds of Sils Maria, which really found a big audience, and Demon Lover from 2002 I really like. In the 1996 Irma Vep starring Maggie Cheung, it's outstanding. I mean, Maggie Cheung at that time was doing all these kick-ass movies with Jackie Chan. She was basically part of Hong Kong filmmaking royalty. And to have her come in and do this behind-the-scenes look at making a French remake where you had Jean-Pierre Léaud, a French New Wave icon, in the director's chair, it was just awesome. And so this show had a lot to live up to. Anytime you're following in the footsteps of all those luminaries. And I think so far this show might even be an improvement upon that original movie because it really seems to capture the filmmaking and TV landscape that we're in right now. Because in the context of the show, Alicia Vikander's character is giant Hollywood movie star, much like her in real life, and she's been doing big franchise movies, much like how Alicia Vikander did Tomb Raider. Her character in this is just coming off a movie called Doomsday. So she's in France doing publicity and premieres, etc. The movie's a huge hit, but it's just a big budget genre film, and she's eager to make a pivot in her career towards more quality movies. She still wants to make hits, but she doesn't want to just do commercial cinema, and so she has agreed to come on board and do this kind of art house remake adaptation of Les Vampires. And the director of this new movie, who is played by Vincent Machan, I can't even say that. I don't speak French. I can't pronounce French. I apologize. But the character's name is René Vidal. He's kind of at his wit's end trying to do this remake. He's trying to be faithful, but he's also still trying to make a commercial film. And part of the joy of this show is watching him barely keep it together. He admits that he's on these antidepressants because he has a history of being completely deranged, completely psychotic, trying to run over his actors with cars. I mean, he's a total madman. But because he's on all these antidepressants, everything's kind of cool. No matter what happens, no matter what crisis emerges, he just kind of rolls with it. But you can tell his insanity is coming apart at the seams, and they're headed towards disaster. And we know he's headed toward disaster because a character who's a producer on the film, played by Alex Descas, who plays the exact same character in the 1996 movie, he informs the director that they can no longer insure the director on the film because of his past history. And so this whole thing's about to fly off the rails. And then adding more crazy fuel to this already crazy fire is the fact that Alicia Vikander's character, Mira, her ex-assistant of 3 years and former lover, recently left her and got married, but they still have a very intense relationship that has all these unusual power dynamics because Mira was Laurie's boss and insisted upon having an open relationship that only applied to Mira. However, sexually, they have a weird kind of dominant and submissive thing where Mira is submissive sexually to Laurie. So while Laurie was working for her behind closed doors, she was the dominant one, which leads to one of the I guess it's one of the most intensely erotic things I've ever seen on HBO, and there's no nudity involved whatsoever. But Laurie ends up visiting Mira on the set, and while everybody's, setting up lights and working on hair and makeup and working on wardrobe, they have this kind of role-playing session where Laurie is telling Mira things to do on the set, like open your knees wider, stand up, turn around. Like basically she's admiring Mira in the Irma Vep costume. And I was just floored by the scene because, once again, Mira's the powerful movie star. Laurie is not. But Mira is very smitten with Laurie. And anyway, just the episode is worth watching for the weird games they play with each other, just for those games alone. But also, Alicia Vikander is doing a brilliant job as Irma Vep. When they first put her on in the costume and she starts moving around and just kind of practicing how the character is going to behave, it's just absolutely fascinating watching her in costume. And as I was watching it, it occurred to me, this is one of the first times since I became a diehard movie lover that I've ever seen the subject of silent cinema being portrayed in a way that is sexy and relevant and modern. I mean, in general, people who are into silent movies, which is basically like 1895 to 1927, apart from a few rare exceptions, that is more or less an academic enterprise for diehard film nuts, people who watch Charlie Chaplin films, Buster Keaton films, Fritz Lang films, F.W. Murnau films, whatever the case may be, or Carl Theodor Dreyer. It's a fascinating subject, but it's not like you can put silent movies in the theater and have hordes of people show up and get excited. But in the context of the show, suddenly a film serial from more than 100 years ago just seems sexy and dynamic and relevant and provocative and exciting. And that is really hard to do. And I'm always kind of kicking myself that on my podcast, Wrong Reel, which is devoted to film history, that I don't spend more time talking about the silent era. I mean, periodically we do, but not nearly as much as I should, because I love watching silent movies, but it's one of my great sources of shame and embarrassment. I've never watched the original Fouillade Le Vampire in its entirety. I've seen many scenes because on any given day in Twitter, people are always showing certain scenes over and over again, and people just go berserk because they're so stylish and so influential. And for the filmmakers who got big in the 20s, people like Fritz Lang, it was very influential. Or even Alfred Hitchcock, who started out as a silent director before he made the transition to sound. And so the fact that this show is able to make a link from silent cinema to current events, pop culture, superheroes, etc., well, that's a tough juggling act to pull off. And so I think Olivier Assayas is just absolutely handling it brilliantly. And also, for people who don't know, Fouillade's original serial was not about vampires. It's a gang of thieves in Paris who called themselves the Vampires. But I believe the first vampire film was F.W. Murnau's Nosferatu in 1922. I could be wrong on that. Anytime you say anything definitive about the silent era, they'll say, oh, well, we found this 2-reel film in somebody's trunk that's been rotting, but here's the first of this, blah, blah, blah. At any rate, it was not a serial about vampires, but it's just got that name. But I think for people who are interested in film history, I think for people who are interested in tales from the trenches about making shows and movies, or for people who are interested in kind of a behind-the-scenes look at big franchises versus art house films today, there's so much about this show to grab people's interest. And I'm hooked. I'll be here through episode 8. I don't know if I'll be doing breakdowns of every single episode, but episode 2 is coming this Monday in 3 days' time. I recommend people watch the first episode. If it grabs you, like me, you'll be watching the next episode on Monday night. But before I go, I should also give a shout out to actress Devin Ross as Regina, Mira's assistant. What I love about her is she's a very young cinephile, and she's very hip, and she's very with it. She's very up to speed, but you can tell she respects the classics, but she definitely wants to be a filmmaker in her own right. And it's interesting contrasting her character with that of René Vidal, who is directing this film because he admits he used to love movies, but now he doesn't like it. He doesn't like movies at all, and he admits maybe one day that love will come back, but he's a filmmaker. He's not a film watcher. And only someone like Olivier Assayas, who has a deep knowledge of film history and obviously a deep catalog of films that he's made, can understand that dynamic, how a lot of times cinephiles fall out of love with watching movies and they almost can kind of grow contempt for them, but maybe they've devoted so many years and decades of their lives to making movies or the art of film appreciation, it's too late to change into a new career at that point. So I just love that contrast between the older director and the young aspiring director. This is a show that really knows what the hell it's talking about. And for the true nerds, they will really appreciate the titles of the episodes, because the titles of the episodes are named after episodes of the original film serial. Episode 1 of the show is The Severed Head. The first episode of the film serial from over 100 years ago is also The Severed Head. So there's so much going on in this show to get excited about, to be stimulated by, and I recommend it. So while I'm annoyed with myself that I wasn't able to review this episode in real time last Monday, better late than never. And this show gets my recommendation. But before I go, I should pause for a moment to mention the sponsor of my podcast, Manscaped. Manscaped has been kind enough to sponsor my podcast, Wrong Reel, throughout the rest of June. So they are the world's foremost experts in men's below-the-waist grooming. And if you don't know what that means, then you probably are a very strong contender to buy the Performance Package 4.0. So go over to manscaped.com and use the discount code WRONGREEL in all caps. It'll bring the price tag down from like $120 to $100. And it's a way of supporting my endeavors here on YouTube and on my podcast. So I would greatly appreciate any support on that front. But I hope you enjoyed this review. Please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, hitting that notification bell, and leaving a comment in the comments below, sharing, you know the drill, and hunt me down on Twitter at Geeking Out if you want to talk more. But thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate it. But more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.